Okay, today's date is June the 1st, 2010, and we're going to ask some questions here of Mr. Rufus Simpson regarding his service in World War II. Mr. Simpson, when did you enter into the service for World War II?
I was sworn in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas on August the 5th, 1942, and I had 2 weeks then to go home and put my affairs in order, and I reported for duty then on August the 19th, 1942, which was Viola's 18th birthday. So I left her with her father and her mother when I... Do you want me to...
Yeah, just...
Then from there I went to Camp Crowder, Missouri, and Camp Crowder, Missouri was a Signal Corps camp, and the reason I got to go there was because I had some training in electronics, some studies and so forth in electronics, and there's where I took my basic training. And during that basic training period, why, they gave you tests to see what your level of competency was in various fields, and I was privileged then to be assigned to go to radar school. Radar was a brand new thing at that time, and it was a very secret thing. So I got assigned to radar school, which was Camp Murphy, Florida, and Camp Murphy is now Jonathan Dickinson State Park down by West Palm Beach. So I went from September to December then of 42, came home on Christmas Day of 1942, and was home a few days and left on January the 9th of 1943 to try to catch up with my company. I finally caught up with them in the desert in Southern California, in desert training there. We were in desert training. We trained there for a while and then shipped out and went across the country by troop train, to Fort Dix, New Jersey. It was in Fort Dix, New Jersey a few days, and then we went by troop train then to Staten Island. Well, we went to New York and then by ferry to Staten Island, and from Staten Island we shipped out then in a convoy, and I was on the SS Mexico, which was a 10,000-ton banana boat that had plied the Caribbean, but it was in troop service now, and in the holes where they usually had cargo, they had tiers of bunks, 4 and 5 bunks high, and we were assigned to a bunk in there, and we sailed south then from Staten Island down almost to somewhere around Florida, the east coast of Florida, joined a convoy then to cross the Atlantic, and we were in a rather large convoy and crossed the Atlantic and landed at Casablanca in North Africa. In Casablanca there just not too long, and then we boarded trains. They were the very primitive trains that went through the Atlas Mountains there of North Africa, and it was very interesting because we were in these cars. They had compartments in these cars, and there was 6 of us to a compartment, and on each, the trains didn't have air brakes like we do have today, and what they would do is there'd be a brakeman, and he had a little house up on the end of the car, and whenever the engineer would whistle for brakes, well, he'd run up and spin the wheel and tighten down the brakes, and more often than not he was down talking with us, we was shooting the bull and so forth, and they'd call for brakes and he'd have to run up real quick and spin the brakes. Well, I think it was 7 days that we crossed through the Atlas Mountains in North Africa to came to a town of Constantine, and that was in Algiers. And that was pretty much of a staging area, and was there a few days, and we left. Then my unit consisted of we had a warrant officer in charge, and then I was a non-commissioned officer in charge. I was a tech sergeant, and I had 11 men, and had 3 vehicles. We had a small arms ordnance truck, we had a 6x6 cargo truck, and then we had a weapons carrier. And the 11 of us then, with our officer, Mr. Sobolov, who was a warrant officer, were assigned then to an area in North Africa there where that a unit similar to ours had taken a direct hit and been wiped out, so we were going in as replacements. We wound up at what they called Hill 609. Now, I think the British called it Green Hill in their history, but it was Hill 609, and the highway went straight up to Hill 609, then turned right in front of the hill, then went around, and so the Germans had this very heavily fortified, and it was the battle was going on pretty strong right there then, and we were camped fairly close to it and dug in, and we were there for several days, and they were attempting to take the hill, and I was in the 22nd or the 22nd Corps under General Patton, and Patton was such a spit and polish type guy.
Did you ever meet Patton?
I never met him. But everything had to be just so. And there was a town of Beja, which was close by. And during this particular time, the Rangers had come into Beja, and the Rangers, was pretty much of a fighting machine. And they come in, they were out of uniform, and Patton had his MPs round them all up and put them in jail. Well, then it came time to assault the hill, and Patton's Rangers was all in jail, so he had to go get them out of jail so that they could assault the hill and take the hill. And then they took the hill, and then we moved from Beja then to a city on Lake Ferryville. Well, Ferryville Lake was actually a bay, an inlet bay, and we moved there and was there for some time. And the German army was collapsing, and then we went from Ferryville, we went to Matur, and from Matur, then we went to Bizerti. And Bizerti was pretty much in shambles then, and the Germans had completely given up. The British was coming in and taking Tunis, and the Americans came in and took Bizerti. Well, Bizerti was virtually demolished, and Tunis was virtually unscathed. And so the British kind of resented us coming to Tunis to on leave or anything like that. But anyway, we got along with them all right. And while we were in Bizerti there, I got an assignment because that was the port, and all the ships, all the Allied merchant ships would come into that port with their cargo and so forth. And I got an assignment there which turned out to be a real good assignment. And my assignment was to board these merchant ships to inspect the ship's radios. That was kind of like the FCC does now, but we had to check the radios to make sure that their frequencies were right and everything was so. And I learned real quick that if I would go up there just before noon, I would get to eat with them, and they always had good chow on those merchant ships. So they always treated me pretty nice. They'd feed me and so forth. Then I would make the inspection. I'd hook up a dummy antenna to the transmitter and check it all out, and check the batteries and check over and make sure that everything was so-so, and then sign it off. And I had this assignment for several months, which was good. But most of our assignments was to equip the armored equipment, like the tanks and the half-tracks and the weapons carriers and what have you, with the radio equipment, the communications, because we had all the communication equipment. So that's what basically we did then during the time that we were in Africa. We were in Africa 18 months, and we shipped out from Bizerti then, my little unit of 11 men and 3 trucks. We shipped out from Bizerti to go to Oran in Algeria. Bizerti was in Tunisia, and Oran was in Algeria. There's a staging area in Oran, and we arrived in the staging area late May of 44, and we were of the impression that we were part of the invasion into Europe. But June the 6th came, which you know is D-Day. June the 6th came, and we heard that the invasion had taken place, so we felt pretty smug we'd missed it. But they still kept us in this staging area, and we were pretty well confined to where we couldn't get out much, but we maybe go to the beach or down to the canteen or something like that. But time came then, and then even June came and passed, July came and passed, August, and I've forgotten the exact date, but about the 6th or 7th of August, they decided it was time for us to move out. So we had all of our equipment, full field packs, and all of our weapons and so forth. And I was armed with a .45 caliber Thompson submachine gun, and which was a pretty heavy weapon. And
you ever shoot it?
Oh yes, and armed with that, and I had a 50 round drum, and I think 4 or 6 different clips. This particular machine gun took either clips or the drum, and so they loaded us on barges and took us out in the bay there at Oran to the troop ship that was waiting out there in deeper water. And then they had the nets over the side, and they'd pull a barge up alongside the troop ship, and you'd hit those nets and go up the nets to board the ship. And of course, with my full field pack and my Thompson submachine gun and all the ammunition, I was pretty well weighted down. And I just got up to the top of the rail, and I couldn't get over. And 2 big old hairy sailors reached over and got me and pulled me over, and I just went a-sailing and landed in a bunch of canvas and rope over here. And I was mad. I was going to get up, and I was going to clean up on some sailors right quick, but before I could even get up, somebody else landed on top of me. they was pulling them on. But anyway, we were on the SS Black then for several days, and sailed around the Mediterranean. We saw Sardinia, and we saw Corsica, and we saw various other places just from the troop ship. And then came August the 15th, which was D-Day for Operation Dragoon. And that was the invasion into southern France. And our company was a fairly big company, even though my section was just of that company was a small group. We was on detached service most of the time. But our company then was assigned, split in three different groups. And one group was assigned to the 45th Infantry Division, one was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, one was assigned to the 36th. And I believe, if my memory serves me right, I was assigned to the 45th. Anyway, it was the division that went in at Saint-Tropez, or Saint-Tropez as they pronounce it, in southern France. And they moved us from the troop ship into LCIs, which is landing craft infantry. Mm-hmm. And the LCIs could get within a few hundred yards of the beach, but then you had to wade in the rest of the way to get to shore. And so our group was it was the 7th Army. Actually, the whole operation was the 7th Army under General Alexander Patch, and the invasion from Normandy, after they got landed and so forth, Patton was the general over there on that side, and our mission was to go up the Rhine, go up the Rhone River Valley, and link up with Patton's troops and cut off thousands of Germans that were in the southeast part of France. And so we moved pretty fast. We just leapfrogged over each other. We had all of the 7th Army's communication equipment, every bit of it. And we would move that as the trucks came in. We just worked day and night. It didn't make any difference what your specialty was. Anybody could handle boxes, so we did. And we moved real fast then up the Rhone River Valley. And by the time winter set in, we were up at a town called Bayonne in France, up in pretty well up in the close to the Vosges Mountains, and we set up a depot there in the Bayonne area in a textile mill. There's a big textile mill, and we hired a lot of local French people and so forth to help us with the boxes and this, that, and the other thing. And I got real well acquainted with one of the Frenchmen that was there, and he took me home with him and would fix meals and what have you. And I had no idea that the French knew so many ways to fix potatoes. They'd have about 5 or 6 different potato dishes, hardly any meat, but mostly all potato dishes: scalloped potatoes, baked potatoes, fried potatoes, you name it. And they had a little baby there. The baby's name was Claudette. She was maybe 18 months old or so. And I would take, out of my rations, I would take the chocolate and things like that to Claudette. And I expect now Claudette must be well up in her 60s.
You speak French?
Pardon?
You speak French?
French. Yeah, she was French.
Do you speak French?
I could speak enough to get by with. It's kind of a pidgin French, but, you know, with waving your arms and this and that and the other thing. But we were there until the early part of December. And then they moved us to a town of Saverne, which is about 70 kilometers from Bayonne to Saverne, which is up in the Vosges Mountains. And here it is, dead of winter now, and we're still in desert clothes. We didn't have winter clothes. And our shoes, we had combat boots, and they were wet. Our feet was wet all the time, and our drinking water froze, and we froze. And it was just pretty bad. Then the Battle of the Bulge. Then, you know, during that time the weather turned real bad, and the air cover couldn't fly, and so the Germans they were making an all-out effort then to break through. That's why they called it the Battle of the Bulge. It was the American lines bulged, but they never did break through. But their plan was to break through and circle to the east and cut us off. And we had over 10,000 tons of the 7th Army's communication equipment up there in this valley. And then the story goes, and I've heard it a number of times, and I heard it from the pulpit of our church here as recently as a couple of years ago, that Patton called a chaplain. And he said, "Now, chaplain," he says, "I want you to pray that this weather will break, and that we'll have a chance then to get some air cover so we can move again." See, the thing was, I'll back up a little bit, the thing was that we had stretched our supply line so long that Patton's tanks run out of gas, they was running low on ammunition and things like that. We just wasn't able to keep it supplied. And here we were up there in this pocket, kind of like setting ducks. So Patton had asked this chaplain to pray, and the story goes, and I heard it from an evangelist in our own pulpit there, that after the chaplain prayed, then the weather broke and the skies cleared. And I asked this evangelist down here at the church, I said, do you know what day that was? And he said, no. He said, I don't know what day that was. And I said, well, it was Christmas Day 1944. Because up to that day, the weather had been socked in, soupy, and just a freezing fog, and you couldn't see 100 yards ahead of you hardly. Christmas Day, the skies was clear, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the sun was shining brightly, and everything that they could get in the air was in the air that day. They were just, I mean to tell you, it was going. And we felt pretty good over that. But then our commanding officer called us in the night of Christmas Day into the room where we were using for a mess hall. He says, we've got 3 days to get what we can get out of here. Said that what they're doing is the anti-aircraft artillery are leveling their 90mm guns and firing 7-second tree bursts over to cover you. And meanwhile, you get as much of this stuff out of here as you can. Well, we worked 18 hours a day there for 3 days, loading trucks and taking them out. And there was a pass. You went up the pass, went up the mountain, and across the pass. And on that last day, I came out on the last truck.
Really?
I came out on the last truck. What we did was, what was left, what we couldn't get out, we bunched up and set it on fire. And when we got up in the mountain, in the pass, and looked back, it looked like the whole valley was on fire. Because see, there so much of this was a telephone cable, rubber insulated cable, and things like that, and it made an awful fire. And of course, a lot of it was in wooden boxes, and we just bunched the boxes up and poured gasoline on it, set it to fire to keep it from falling in the Germans' hands. So we got out and we retreated 70 kilometers back to Théon, back to this textile mill where we had been before. And the textile mill had a lot of skylights in it. Well, the skylights, during the bombing and so forth, they'd been broken out. And when we'd been there before, we had canvas tarps over it. Well, when we got back, the canvas tarps weren't there. We'd taken them, and there was snow inside the building and this, that, and the other thing. And so we bedded down. Glad to be back, but we bedded down. And I just didn't want to get out. But we were there then. Then from that time, that was late in December. We were there, and then after the first year, we finally got winter clothes. Finally got shoe packs and parkas and things like that, mittens and what have you. And another thing that was I remember that was a plus for me was that I got rid of that Thompson submachine gun, and I got a lightweight carbine instead, a 30 caliber lightweight carbine instead. But I never was so glad to get rid of anything in my life as I was that Thompson submachine gun. But anyway, during this time that we were there, we got a meritorious citation from General Patch, and he came down himself and presented it to our company. And it's if you look at my old uniform coat in there now, you'll see there's a wreath, a gold wreath on it. That was that meritorious service citation, and read that under all of these adverse circumstances and under fire and this, that, and the other thing, we had moved these supplies and kept the 7th Army supplied, kept their communications open and so forth. So we got that. We got a meritorious service award for that. And you say, well, what good was that? Well, it was worth 5 points when I got ready to get discharged. So it was each of your campaign stars was worth 5 points, and so forth. But anyway, when spring came, then we crossed over into Germany on the Saar River. The route we had originally taken, we didn't go that way. We went across the Saar River.
Were you still in danger then?
Yeah, the Germans they were surrendering, and we used to get these German prisoners. We just get dozens of them, hundreds of them, and what we would do, we'd bring them in, we'd delouse them, and get them a shower, let them wash their clothes, then we could work them for 2 or 3 days, and then we had to turn them over to the prison camp. Oh, time we got through, time the 3 days up, they didn't want to leave. They liked our food, and but we would turn loose of them and get some more. Anyway, we got then. We were at Mannheim in Germany when Germany surrendered, and Mannheim in Germany, and Germany surrendered, and this was like late May. I've forgotten the exact dates in May now, but President Roosevelt died about that time, and we felt pretty bad about that. But after the Germans surrendered then, and Germany completely surrendered unconditionally, well then there were so many of those Germans that were abandoning the Eastern Front and coming over and surrendering to the Americans. They didn't want to surrender to the Russians. They didn't like the prospect of surrender, but they would surrender to the Americans. And so then we were in it had been a military school there where that they had trained artillery officers, the Germans had, and that's where we were camped out, bivouacked, and we were there for a few weeks, and then they were giving us an opportunity then to take a little furlough, and I got the chance then to go into Paris, and I was in Paris on June the 20th, which was our 3rd wedding anniversary, and that we had not been able to spend any time together. She wasn't there, so I spent our 3rd anniversary in Paris. And some of us, we just spent our time riding the subway and so forth. Others kind of looked for trouble and things like that, but went to the red light districts and the honky tonks and the saloons and what have you. But a couple of guys and I that were married and had other values, why we would ride the subways, and we rode out to the Eiffel Tower, and the elevator took us up to the 2nd level of the Eiffel Tower, and then we climbed the stairs up to the 3rd level, which was quite a little climb. And I've got some pictures somewhere that I've taken from up there on the Eiffel Tower. Went to the Arc de Triomphe, went to the